secularism means the view that there is no non-human force that determines our lives. It comes basically in two major forms. Atheism, which denies the existence of a superior being altogether, and agnosticism that says it's not certain whether such a being exists or not, or whether such a spiritual force exists or not. But in both versions, the outside determination of human life is rejected. Humans are autonomous. They rule their own lives, whether they like it or not, whether they are aware of it or not. They think, many of them, most of them, that their lives are dependent on some, or determined by some non-human force, spiritual force of one kind or another. But this is an illusion. And the fact is that secular views developed only after a very long period of time. And the reason for that is that as humans developed from earlier forms of life, human race is about 200,000 to 300,000 years old, and we all come from East Africa originally. There was a need, as the brain developed, as the language developed, to explain what happened in the world. And so from an original worship of trees and stones and water and sun and moon and animals and so on, that were given that kind of a spiritual form, to deities. And this was a very natural development. It was only much later that people began asking questions. How do you actually explain that a statue or a concept like the influence of the moon or some sea or something could actually impact on human life? One of the first philosophers that thought that this was in fact impossible was in Egypt in the 14th century before Christianity, where a pharaoh by the name of Akhenaton or Echnaton thought in one version that the sun was the only God, a kind of monotheism, but then the other version was that it wasn't the sun but the ray of the sun, so an abstract concept. And there is a theory that influenced the Jewish monotheism. Whether that is true or not, I can't tell. Nobody can really prove it. But monotheism in Judaism developed very slowly. In the early kingdom of Judah and of Israel, there was the deity, Jehovah, was seen like another deity. There was a statue of Jehovah's wife, Asherah, in the temple that Solomon built in Jerusalem for hundreds of years. And the first writings that we have in ancient Hebrew script refer to the Jewish God as having a wife. So it develops. But then an opposition arises. There's a controversy. And the opposition says, not only is there only one God, but that God created the universe. No, they're not separate gods who did that, but it's the same God. And interestingly enough, originally that same God had different names. In other words, he came from different sources, and there were different gods, and they were then combined. The Hebrew word for God is El, and the word El represents the Canaanite supreme God. The supreme God of the Canaanites was called El. And so the original name of the Jewish God was also El. Yeah? And so on. And then you have this development of the monotheistic view. But within that original monotheism, you already have questions. How come? Yeah? Does that God really control? And we see that humans behave in completely different ways, and the principles that are supposed to guide them, decided by God, are not really observed by them. And so slowly another view arises. And that view says that there is no God, or that the God that maybe exists has no impact on our lives. In the Talmud, which was written between about the 2nd and the 5th or 6th century of the Christian era, there is already a figure like that. His name was Elisha ben Avuya. He was called the Other, or in Hebrew, Acher. And Elisha ben Avuya said there is no judge. There is no law and there is no judge, because there is no judge. There can't be a law. There is a law that is invented by humans. And then there are individuals like that within Judaism in the Middle Age, early Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, who rebel. Very often they don't dare to speak very openly, and they are immediately attacked. But that view exists. So secular views begin to develop. This is not secularism. There is no Jewish secularism in the Middle Ages. When Spinoza comes, he does not say that there is no God. Spinoza says nature is God, or God is nature. That, of course, is something else. It is a kind of agnosticism, because if all of nature is God, then there is no God. But if all of nature is God, then we live within God, so that we are part of God. This is not secularism. This is a move towards secularism. There are secularists in ancient and medieval times, but they are not Jewish. One of the most typical developments within the non-Jewish world of this is Buddhism, because the Buddha, who lived at the end of the 6th and early 5th century before Christianity in what is now southern Nepal, laughed, ridiculed the gods that were being worshipped in his culture. Yeah? How can you say that a statue of a god decides your fate? This is just stone, nothing, yeah? He did not answer the question, because he said it was irrelevant. Humans are responsible for themselves. That is what he taught. And he wasn't the only one. There was similar thinking in Greek and Roman life, not in Jewish life. Jewish secularism developed much later, and it is really very much influenced by the non-Jewish version of secularism. But by the 18th and 19th century, you have already clear Jewish secular views. Now you have several views like that. One secular Jewish view will try to reject Jewish culture altogether. And this is the Marxist version, which started in the middle of the 19th century. But there's another version that says within Judaism, you can interpret the Jewish civilization by secular means. In other words, you say you understand religion because you understand why people became worshippers of non-existent deities and spiritual whatever. But you understand it, but you reject it, and you interpret Jewish life, Jewish history, and Jewish culture as human development. And that is really Jewish secularism. This developed in the 19th century. In the 20th century, it was already very widespread. It had all kinds of versions, a socialist or social democratic version, a liberal non-socialist version, even a right-wing version. Now, secularism, you see, can be non-humanistic. In other words, it can be anti-democratic, anti-liberal. It can say, yes, we are responsible for ourselves, but if we are responsible for ourselves, we want to rule over others. We want to destroy other communities and other cultures. And this is, of course, the case in the great ideologies, radical ideologies of the 20th century, fascism, Nazism, communism. And it continues to this day. But within Jewish culture, there's an answer to that. We are not just secular. We are humanistic secular. We are of that kind that interprets its autonomy, its rule over itself, by saying we are responsible for others. We are the same as our neighbors. We are the same type of people, because there are no human races. There's only one human race.